So welcome to the March meeting of the Southampton Village Planning Commission. We have a few items on our agenda tonight. Maybe I'm going to turn it over, Eldon, maybe to you to talk a little bit about what we've been looking at on the historic the district.
Sure.
I guess maybe I'll just mention that when a new mayor came into office in June or July, there were a number of items he put on our agenda. One of the key items was for us to assist in developing a study of the status of the historic district and historic code. We've obviously been working on a lot of other things the last few months, so hopefully we now can turn to that. Eldon Scott, a member of the commission, did a outline which I sent everyone.
Do you have any more copies?
I just have this
I have mine. I have what you sent.
Okay, great.
You want to share?
Yeah. So what I did was, and we discussed, I think, at the end of last year, a couple of new initiatives, and one of them was to look at process around the Architectural Review Board. So I started with just writing a draft RFP, and I'll just go through it roughly, and then I think we should discuss what that is. But the background before I even go into it is I also reached out to Zach, and we reached out to Curtis, a few other members of the ARB, just to start to get some feedback as to what might go into this. Zach was incredibly helpful. He really knows this process super well. And Curtis was incredibly helpful too. So I think the idea now is just for us to think through, and obviously we'll check back in with them and in the village to make sure that we've got the right sort of language and scope identified. But I can go through roughly what we initially talked about, and then we could discuss it. So what we thought would be most useful is to divide it into two phases. And so just for clarification, this would be an RFP to hire an outside consultant, much like we did for the planning review. And that would be someone obviously with specific experience in historic preservation and how these things work in New York State in a village setting. So the two phases we broke it into were, phase one is more about process, and phase two was about the historic district boundaries. So they're two kind of very different sorts of things. Also, the phase one process hopefully could go a little more quickly. In phase two, when one explores the possibility of any historic district boundaries, is a bigger undertaking. So under phase one, we thought, much like we did with Glynis, we might first just have the consultant review some of the existing conditions, like how many applications does that board receive, and just try to look at what are any of the pinch points for the ARB in the process of reviewing applications. And some of that is just initially just some data gathering, and then to look at the volume that they're handling and the types of applications, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's an information gathering phase. And then we suggested, I just read it, review of steps, criteria, and results of the current ARB review process. So that would be really looking at how an application comes in to the village, when and how it gets to the ARB, who reviews it, what criteria and guidelines the ARB is using. And just to back up for a second, I think the idea here is to really kind of clarify, hopefully even simplify the process, which we think will be of a benefit both to the board and to applicants. So there's a little bit more clarity going into the process, what the outcome might be. Then the fourth thing we had here was, as part of the process, we suggest that they look at the existing design guidelines, which were written, I don't know how many years ago, maybe 10 years ago, maybe longer?
2000.
Longer?
Yeah, I think
Right.
it's almost 20 years.
Maybe 20 years.
Right.
And update that document, both to reflect what the conditions are today, but also to maybe even further clarify what the significant design issues are to look for. And, we would go through this whole process, but what I thought might be useful is to put that in a form that's really readable and understandable by a lay person, so that perhaps even when they're buying a house, there could be a little pamphlet there. so they understood, oh, okay, I'm in the ARB, what does that mean? Does it mean I can't paint my door red? Well, no. And what has to be, so there's more clarity. And then that was sort of, actually the last point was the possibility of a plan for how one would distribute and educate the larger population what the ARB is and what it's supposed to be doing.
Can I ask a question? You mentioned the ARB several times, but what kind of applications usually are forthcoming from the historic district? Are there things that would mainly deal with zoning of the ZBA, or just with just with colors or things like that? I mean, the ZBA would be involved if they want to make a change of some sort.
So
What kind
this
of applications
specific,
is
what
it?
we're looking at here, and I wasn't asked to look at anything other than Architectural Review Board applications. So this would not include ZBA.
Right.
I mean, would that be?
It's an interesting question. I mean, one of the
How
things,
to relate to an historic district? I mean, how vis-à-vis an
well,
historic
the
district?
ARB gets a very broad range of applications, so anything that's done in the historic district, they get. They also get any physical change of a house. And they also get, and this in our town right now, in our village, sorry, under the current code, the building inspector decides whether an existing house outside of the historic district that's proposed to be demolished should be referred to the ARB. He decides whether it's important enough to be, I don't know why, but that's the way it works.
Within the historic district?
No, outside the historic district.
Outside.
So outside, anything in the historic district automatically gets referred to the ARB for anything you're doing, basically, including the
So
gate.
not the ZBA, the ZBA.
No, the ZBA is only if you're going to change the
Right.
zone.
If it's outside
Right,
zoning.
right. But every single house within the historic district, anything you're doing of, to the exterior.
Exterior.
Actually, we don't really control interiors
No,
here.
right.
But anything that goes to the ARB. But the building inspector also has the review of if you want to demolish or significantly change an existing house outside the historic district, if he thinks, don't ask me about the building department, but if he thinks it's an important house, he has the right to say, I want to refer this to ARB. It's not clear, but what's interesting is the code is pretty silent over what the ARB can do. So in other words, he refers it, but the code doesn't really say what the ARB can do about that
All
referral.
right, but this is not pertinent to the historic district. So
No, but it is one of the reasons why I think people have been talking about extending the historic district is the ARB's been getting these reviews from the building department, it doesn't know what to do with them. So like there's a, 1780 era house on North Main Street, someone wants to tear it down, John Foster says, okay, I think this needs to go to the ARB. It's unclear in the code what the ARBs can do about it, other than to moan and groan or, there's not actually, it doesn't say in the code what they're supposed to do when they get that application, just it's silent.
Well, and I think the other
Right.
part of this is just, creating more clarity about all these issues, and maybe we don't even know what all the issues might
Right,
be.
right.
And I think that, good fences make good neighbors, so the idea is that, good laws make good neighbors too, to try to prevent or to get ahead of some of these issues early,
Right.
so that the board has clear guidelines and applicants have clear guidelines. And I'm sure there's many issues like the ones you brought up.
Right,
that
right.
There is unclear, it's not super clear,
Right.
which way things
Right.
should go.
There is an existing historic district.
There is.
Yeah. But also, by the way,
It's 30 years old.
the idea
Okay.
is
But I'm just curious, I mean, I need a frame of reference, I guess. Where is it? What is it? Where is it? What are the
you
boundaries?
have something?
I'm wondering if it might be in here.
No, I don't think so.
but it just also to clarify, the process may come back with very little suggested changes, or it may come back with more suggested changes. I
Right.
think that the idea was to bring an outside professional in to look at our process, who understands how this has worked in many other places, and just make recommendations that we could review, and we would presumably would have meetings here. They would come in and make presentations like we did with Glennis.
So the historic district as it stands is 30 years old, and then did the village just enact an historic designation for a certain amount of years? We were talking about
no.
that? They didn't
No,
enact that?
it's just an area.
I'm sorry?
It's just an area, and the area may or may not include houses that are really historically significant.
Right.
So you have a mix in there. So I mean, maybe a better approach is to identify what's significant
Right.
rather than
Well,
just give an
And
area.
actually, it was really interesting because I chatted with Zach for some time, and he really understands the law and the history that needs to be behind a property for it to be significant.
Right.
And, it's quite interesting, because there are a lot of things, like I didn't understand why there's a house on Little Plains which was demolished, which was probably a 1905 cottage about halfway down towards the ocean. And he explained that's outside of the ARB district, so it's a different set of criteria because that was not in the historic district.
Okay, well, there's this
Very
process
tough.
for applicants who want to demolish an existing house and setting review for any house built before 1940. Did
Right.
that get passed?
Yes.
Okay. So that changed.
But, again, the problem, I think, is, which I think both Eduardo and Eldon are pointing out, it's not sure what that means. Like, in other words, you have there's sort of a disconnect in the current code where it gets reviewed, but
It's vague.
it's very vague as to what the ARB can and can't do, which is one of the reasons I think those meetings get so confused.
Well, what do they do?
Yeah, what do they?
Well, right now, I think they are, just to speak very openly, I think they are somewhat unclear of what their
What have they been doing?
So, they do everything from talking about paint and gates to talking about style and
We're talking
importance.
about demolition right now.
Well, in demolition, in the historic district,
Outside the historic
they
district,
can't do
if a
anything. Right
house-
now, everyone's assumption is since there's nothing stated in the code, they have no power to actually do anything.
Well, it was
So why
interesting.
is
Did
it
you read the
referred to the
article in
ARB
the
in the
press
first
this
place,
week
then?
about Curtis and the ARB and Mokomanto?
Yes.
And Curtis, I guess, said something exactly what the ARB was there to do?
Now, as far as what's in the historic district, when it gets referred to the ARB, they must have some kind of guideline.
Yeah, no, they do, but the problem is, yes, in the historic district, for example, if you want to demolish a structure, they clearly have the right to review that.
I think the standards is just higher outside of the historic
Right.
district.
Outside the historic district, it's not clear how much power they actually have they have an advisory power, they don't have the regulatory power
Yeah,
that they do. And ultimately, I
You can review older houses, but I
Right.
think it's just,
I think outside the historic district, the only people who can actually enforce anything are the trustees, not the ARB.
Well, or
I'm not sure.
unless the house itself, unless the homeowner itself has designated it as an historic
Correct.
structure, and they can do that.
I would think
you might be talking about the historic tax credit.
No, they can say they can go through the process just like anything else. And have it designated as an historic house.
Right.
Deemed historic, and I think the federal government actually has those guidelines.
Yeah.
That's right, it is, it's a Fed thing.
And it's not that cut and dry. I mean,
No, it's a process, since we're talking about
People
process.
don't voluntarily put their property into the historic review process.
unless it's some advantage to it.
Right.
There's
they can get
two
tax
things.
credits.
There's local
Right.
preservation laws, local historic districts, which we have one of. And you're in the historic district, you go to ARB review,
Right.
or if your house is a certain age, you might be in the ARB review.
Right.
There's something else, which is
Yeah, but
the
it's not just
the state designation of historic structures, which
Right.
doesn't relate directly to historic boundaries at the local level.
Right,
And what that designation allows you to do, some people seek that out, because you can get tax credits for
Right.
renovating those sorts of buildings.
yeah.
I don't think you see a lot of that in the residential area. It tends to be more commercial.
And I
It
think-
does.
I think probably that the state has to actually review and
State reviews it.
and
Yep, yep.
approve whether it's historic.
Well, I know somebody that went through the process.
Yeah, well, I used to do that
Preservation Office, right.
in Connecticut. I was a state historic preservation certified something. And we would review buildings for designation on the state register. And the reason people asked for that was for the tax credits.
Right, right.
And it's runs somewhat parallel to, but it's not the same as local historic designation. So I don't think we're dealing with a lot of the state.
But it's still binding in certain ways, no? I mean, if
It's only
somebody
binding that
wanted,
if you do it and if you take the tax credits, then you're obliged to meet the state historic preservation requirements.
okay,
But if you don't take the tax credit,
yeah.
there's nothing binding on you for that tax program.
But as regards demolition, there's nothing? No, not it. Huh?
But
Interesting.
but doesn't the state also voluntarily say go out and designate certain structures, whether if they're asked for or not? For example, in Manhattan, there's like a row of these townhouses near where the World Trade Center is, on
I know
Redding
those,
Street.
yeah.
And those are historic and, you know.
Those are- I mean,
designated.
usually-
I don't think the owners asked for it, I think.
No,
the state
that would have
asked
been
for it.
the City of New York
Right.
Landmarks
Voting
Preservation
authority, yeah.
Right.
landmark those properties.
Right.
So that, and they may also have this historic tax credit designation, but they're two different things.
Right, that's it.
Right. So, I think one of the general comments has been that our code is so old and, that it's worth looking at to say, is it now up to date? And I think also, just from the ARB, they've had obviously several decades of experience of what's working and not working in terms of their current review. And I think, just given here it is. Given the nature of our village, and the amount of money people are spending on houses, I think one of the things that's happened over time is they're facing a lot of expertise on the other side. And so they're hearing a lot about what they should or should not review, and since the code is not very explicit, it puts them in a difficult circumstance. So clarifying for everybody what they should and shouldn't be reviewing should, in theory at least, help both sides, because everyone then is clear going in what they're likely to be an issue or not.
Does the ARB have a written guideline that we can look at?
But they haven't really, the guidelines exist, but I don't believe they've really been used very actively.
Right.
So
But
we-
they're there.
they are there.
We should look at them.
We should look
Yes,
at, that's
yes.
part of, that's on the
Yeah,
scope.
yeah,
is to look
yeah.
at them.
Where are they written?
I have a copy of them, but I don't know where they're kept.
Where did you get the copy?
Oh, you can go ask for a copy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I can, so I'll
It's up in the
circulate it.
building
I'll
department?
circulate it.
Oh,
yeah.
okay, okay.
Now, we looked at the Tuxedo Park design guidelines that you found, and they're really great in terms of not just the level of detail, but the ease of a lay person looking at them. Because you don't want to make it so technical that people can't understand
No,
the
no,
gist.
yeah.
So I think that it would be useful so that, to me, the most important thing is at the very beginning when someone might be even buying a house, that they just have a better understanding of the process. So there's clarity, it's very open. I think also it would make it be more useful within the meetings to be able to refer back to those.
Refer to something, yeah.
But the guidelines are guidelines, they're not code, they're not law.
Right.
They don't have to be followed, it would more be
Oh,
suggestions.
so it's interpretation.
And part of the issue, I guess, again, part of the issue in our village is, in some places, that works fine. People understand the guidelines, they more or less follow the guidelines, whatever. Here, you have, extremely highly paid and talented lawyers on the other side who will say to the
You can
ARB,
keep
you're not
the terms."
allowed to follow the guidelines because they have no legal weight. So they're in a very difficult circumstance, because the code itself is,
Well, that's a good point. I think the other
Right.
important thing for our involvement
Right.
is to take that through a process,
Right.
with public meetings, so that,
Right.
the theory behind planning is that you have an open process and you hear what all the issues are, and hopefully we get to, if we look at the design guidelines, something which is acceptable
Right.
rather to the community. So then it does have more weight
Right,
for the board.
yeah, because it gets written in, right?
Right, and people misunderstand. I think a lot
It
of
doesn't go
people...
in the E code. It's just, it's a separate document. It's
Right.
not in the E code.
So just use an example. In the village center, we added a lot to the code, which made it
Yes.
much more clear what you
Yeah.
can and can't build.
Right.
But we also have design guidelines that are separate from that, that are pretty lengthy. And so if you're building the village center, you have both a code that's fairly clear at this point, and then design guidelines that are pretty specific. And between the two, it's not that difficult to figure out what you can and can't do.
And the ARB is aware and they know and...
Right, but most of that won't even go to the ARB. Right, but if it went to the ARB could look it up and they'd have it, and it's, would be very easy for
It's
them to...
fairly easy for
Right.
them
And
to...
you're talking about the business district.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, right.
So so if you compare that to what we have right now in the historic district, we have a very old historic district with fairly old code at this point, and with fairly minimal design guidelines, which have mostly not been
All right,
paid
so we
much
just want
attention
to
to.
bring it up to
So
speed.
it's in a very
What are the
different place.
boundaries of the historic district?
I can't find
Yeah, I
a
was
map,
just-
and I can't get
that's
my
what I
iPad to open, but
It's generally-
Zoning book, right?
I don't
think parts
think
of
so.
Gin Lane, I
Right.
think back down through parts of the estate section.
I think it's
in
Captain's
the
Neck
village.
through Wyandanch, I think.
Yeah.
I think it'd be
All the way
nice
along
to have
Meadow
a
Lane,
fair idea
all
of
along?
talk
No,
about
it's
that.
It's
Captain's
not, a
Neck.
lot of Middle Lane is not in it.
No.
You know,
Yeah.
because if you just go further out of Middle Lane, they're mostly newer houses.
I
It's
know.
not-
And I'll tell you something,
Certainly west
just as an
of-
example, my street is
west
not
of
in it,
Captain's.
which is always
Too bad.
a surprise to everybody.
Doesn't go through anyway.
But I mean, it's a fairly limited, right, well, one
Well,
way or
a
the
map
other.
would be good.
Yeah, there is a map.
Mike,
I'm just
Might
trying
try
to,
to pull it up on here.
yeah.
You gonna go get one? No.
It's a very, you know, they actually, when they
I
did
think
the
I've
historic
seen one.
district, they,
I think
they
it was
they
a while
actually
ago.
pulled the boundaries back. And then there was a study done, I think also 20 years ago, of expansion of the historic
More
district.
recent than that, I think.
And more
10
recent.
years ago.
10 years ago, but nothing was ever done with that study.
Yeah.
It
So,
proposed something.
so just to be
Well,
clear,
where is
the-
the study?
Well, in the proposed
I also
taking, it was
got a
not.
copy of the study. I've been
You have a
gathering all
copy?
those documents, so I will circulate all the documents I have so we can all see them. But just to be really clear, the proposal that I'm putting forward is that phase one is process only. Phase two is to examine the existing historic district boundaries. My suggestion, I think I've been getting agreement, is to keep those as 2 tracks. Because it could be a much lengthier process to
Right.
look at the historic district boundaries.
Right.
Because then
Right.
work has to be done examining all the properties for their historic characters, more discussion with landowners, so we don't want one to tie the other down.
Crown, yeah.
Yeah.
The process is first.
Yeah. There are also potentially different skill sets in terms of who does that work.
Yeah.
I don't see, they don't seem to have it on the village website, because I don't see it.
It's somewhere in there, but.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it.
But why don't we also, I'm happy to get it and circulate the,
I think it's right at the,
Land.
I think it's right in the hallway, actually.
That's where I checked. They don't, they used to keep them out there, and I don't know, either they run out of them, or it's been pulled.
Oh,
But
okay.
it's not out there. That's what I was checking. I have a couple in my office across the street, but I don't know how long you'll be here.
I will get hold of it.
Yeah, no, I'll circulate it around. I don't know why, I can't find it on the website. I thought it was also.
Not,
Yeah.
so I think that for this process part, there's two, there's really 2 key deliverables. The first one is just sort of the data gathering phase, just to make sure that they have an understanding of what are hot points, what are not hot points. And I think as part of data gathering, it would involve meeting with all the members of the ARB, meeting with architects and practitioners, just to get a full picture of where people see there are issues or not. A lot of this process is working fine. And I see that in what I'm writing here, and we're going to get some more input from everyone, is one would be just to review the process, the key steps in that process, and then 2 is the idea of updating the design guidelines, which are really part of the process. So those would kind of be the recommendations to process would come out of that, and recommendations, I guess, or an actual update to the design guidelines could come out of that.
And then, once we have that information, then it would go to the selection of an RFP person to further investigate
Well,
this?
I think that the idea is that we, and if you have any comments on this, we'll circulate them. The idea is to get this RFP in good form and then send that out to qualified firms.
I see,
In the
okay.
next
Right.
Okay,
month.
before the public, okay.
This is part of the public meeting. It's for people to understand.
Yeah, I
how
know
we're
it
looking
goes
at
to
that,
Forster
Hello,
Coast,
public.
Yeah,
and then it goes up South Main Street.
Okay,
so yeah.
okay.
Includes a lot of.
But we'll have, I think the village has someone who actually writes RFPs, so they haven't even looked at this yet. So they have to really,
Oh, they have to look at it.
they have to look at this and
Yeah,
get it in the
yeah.
right
It would be
form.
Steve Bunch or?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
And it's request for proposals, so
I
obviously.
mean, because the ARB seems to be the first stop on a long process, it certainly I think behooves to make it clearer for at least their own committee to be able to.
Well, that's actually one of the issues. Sometimes things go to ZBA and then they go to ARB, and the sequence is maybe something that
Cockeyed,
they'll look at.
yeah.
Right, I mean, some of it is, there's a intake process now where something comes into the building department, the building inspector, the people who work for him, make, decide sort of which bucket
Where
it
it
goes
goes,
to.
yeah.
And then they send it to the various boards, but the boards act right now totally independently of each other. There's no,
As
and
we
sometimes, the ARB does something, if it changes the way the zoning works, then it has to go back to the ZBA. I mean, it's a very crazy process now, and it can be very
Lengthy.
extended
It's
because
also
of
just a
that.
lot of workload for the
Yeah.
ARB.
Lengthy.
A lot of
Right.
big, thick papers for them to go through.
I know.
And part of the problem, I think, also is their purview is so wide. One of the things that the process that someone may decide is, different levels of review for different things. So they get everything from a driveway gate to Makamoto, right?
I
Those
know.
are wildly
Right.
different things for them to
I
work
know,
on.
right.
But there's no clear guideline in the code that one has a different level of review than the other. So one thing you might be able to say in the code is, look, as long as driveway gates meet certain rules, you don't have to spend a lot of time on them, right?
Right.
As opposed to,
So it would
when you
go
have
into
a review a
another bucket.
house,
Right.
you have the bandwidth to really do the more extensive review that's needed, or paint,
Right.
for example. There was one application I know where, the discussion of paint color went on for weeks.
Oh, but-
That may or may not be
Oh, I remember
important.
that one.
Yeah.
on South Main.
to spend a lot of time on versus someone tearing down a piece of a old house, right? So I think one of the problems right now is the code doesn't really give any guideline of how you,
No substance.
right, what's really the most important. I mean, it says community character, that's a really hard thing to define.
I mean, there's
as we
a,
know.
I read through it again. There's a lot in there. It's pretty good, but the question is, I mean, I don't even know. I don't
Right.
even know what might be some particular issues that we
Right.
could just address and make better. So,
Just curious. So the ARB has guidelines. They're not in the code. How about, and that's a board. So does the planning board have guidelines that are not in the code? And the ZBA, do they have guidelines that are not in the code?
Oh, the CBA's got the zoning book.
Right,
That's,
right.
That's
and
separate.
there's a
Okay.
definition
Right.
of what qualifies for variance.
Okay, but
But
what
one of
about,
the things that comes up with ZBA is community character, which is kind of an ARB thing. So there's some,
that's not CBA.
well, I'm just curious about this
one of the
code.
criteria, there's
Yeah, no, it definitely is.
This code
there's-
doesn't address
yeah,
all of the
absolutely.
boards, or?
yeah, there's an economic criteria, there's a number of things.
I'll tell you what's odd about our ZBA criteria is generally those boards across the state, because every municipality has a board like the ZBA, that's in the state constitution. Generally, the reason they exist is in large part, because you have a hardship.
Yeah,
Like, because you can't, it's a hardship to meet the code.
right.
If you actually read the ZBA code, it doesn't say the way they determine to approve of something or not is because of hardship. If you read the ARB code, it talks about hardship. It's completely, I don't understand how
That's what I'm just sort of
that
curious
happens.
about this.
It's actually in the wrong place, I think.
I'm curious about all
Right.
these boards, just sort of standing in line here. Are they
Right.
all, you know?
There's no cohesiveness.
Right, right, that's part of I think the hardship, usually a ZBA type board, a major criteria is, show me you have a hardship, that you
I know.
can't meet the zoning because it's a hardship.
I'm-
It doesn't actually say that, but if you then go into the code for the ARB, it talks about hardship
Talks about
in the context of whether or not you can tear down a house, for example. And it gives the ARB the ability to do things, because it would be a hardship. But why it's in that code and not in the other code is just, who knows, right? This is an old code.
Yeah.
So it's a little hard to know why it ended up the way it did.
Okay.
But I don't think that's what the trustees have asked us to look at. The trustees have asked us to look at really just the historic district and how that code works.
I understand.
Right, so,
So my suggestion would be, look at this and let's circulate around any comments on the document. And I'll also make sure I get comments from the village and from the ARB. Yeah.
And we interrupted you, we're going to go to the second part.
Oh, so phase two, which the idea is to keep that as a separate process, would be to actually go through the process, which is fairly typical in any of these villages or towns, to look at the existing historic district boundaries, determine if there's reason or rationale to expand the boundaries.
Well, and look at their codes too, and how they relate to
Oh, well,
To
looking at other codes might be a part of the process.
part of the
piece.
process, okay.
The second piece is straightforward,
All right, boundaries.
expansion of historic district boundary, separate process, that someone has to come in and actually survey the structures and determine, if there's a significant number of structures of historic value. And that's a pretty well-oiled, understood thing. And
Is it?
Yeah,
Goes quickly?
No.
it doesn't go quickly, but
You said well oiled.
Instead of having boundaries though, doesn't it make more sense to actually identify structures that are historic?
you can have individual
Yeah, that
landmarks.
is the other
You
option.
can do that too.
Right.
Instead of having boundaries, because again, in the historic district, you may have a lot of houses that are not historic at all.
Right, well, the theory of a historic, you're absolutely right. So the theory of a historic district is that you want to give the historic board control over not just a significant house, but all houses, because the context of the historic district is of importance. One of the comments I think about our code right now is we don't really have a provision in our code that you have in a lot of historic districts where they rank the houses by in
Like contributing, non-contributing.
Right, so
Yeah, I was
again, the
just
problem for the
gonna say,
ARB is every, just in terms of you look at some of the recent cases before the ARB, some are houses that one might think are of significance in this historic district, and some are not, but the ARB code basically treats them all the same. So that's one of the problems right now.
Someone that really should be able to demolish a house go through a hard time because
But just because it's in the historic district.
But the village
Right.
historian is very
Right.
familiar with
Right.
the laws as they pertain to this, and
Right.
he's,
Right.
he would help the board interpret whether a one-story house is contributing and.
Right, but the only thing I would
Yeah.
say is the value to putting sort of ranking, this is a
Yeah, there
contributing
is-
structure, this is a significant structure,
Right.
is that the buyer knows.
right.
So one of the problems right now that I think the IRB's been talking about is they have these buyers and, whether it's true or not, the buyers are basically saying, no one told me. And so I bought this house, I paid a lot of money for it, and now I'm being told I can't change it because it's an important structure. I didn't find that out until I was midway through the process, as opposed to them being able to read a report and say, okay, I'm buying this
Should the
house.
seller be given, and the attorney for the seller be given that information to the buyer so he knows what the historic district
No, I think the
is?
realtor should impart that
Or
to
the building
buyer.
department.
I mean,
Or the building,
Or
if
the
you go
building.
in
Should be
New
the
York,
seller.
so in New York, if you bought a house and it was in the historic district, the broker would have to tell you.
right.
And the attorney would
the
tell you.
seller.
Right, you're right. All of them would tell you, it's in the historic district, it's a
And these
contributing
are your
structure.
limits.
Right. Here, we don't really have that. So you're told you're in the historic district, but, there's no
Your
differentiation.
attorney, when you're buying, will
This is-
tell you if you're in the
Yeah.
historic
law.
district.
Yeah.
Right.
Not questions Southampton.
Right,
New
right,
York.
right.
This is, by law, you have to tell a buyer, for example, if the pipes are rotten, need to be changed.
Right.
The roof is about to go, and you're in the historic district, you can't touch the house. I mean, you
Well,
have to
except,
give out
right.
significant.
You're right, except in our current code, it doesn't say this is a contributing house versus a non-contributing house for a significant
But
house.
it's
But
historic district.
It's just that's in the
Everything
district.
is
Right.
frozen the same way, so. I mean, a
right,
buyer's gotta know that.
Right.
And I think that's also, I think it would be great if we redid the design guidelines and they were very readable. So that could be useful
Yeah,
to.
and I think.
to buyers.
I think a
what
ranking
you're saying,
system is
How it
important.
contributes, I think.
Yeah, that, I don't,
Right,
I'm not
right.
100% familiar with actually how that's done, but, the village historian actually knows
It'd be nice,
all those nuances.
right.
I mean,
Yeah.
the good
Yeah,
thing
good.
in our village is there's been a tremendous amount of historic research into houses here.
Yeah.
It's not like the
I know, I'm
information's not
really
out there.
appreciative about that.
Right,
Yeah,
it's not like it's not
great.
out there.
Yeah.
But at Ronald's point, it's an interesting one. So, what you can sometimes, there's two different ways to do it. You can create a historic district, and that creates sort of a review. But you can also say, look, we don't think this area is really a historic district, but there are these structures that we're going to say are significant and need
I think that the individual landmarking tends to
Right.
be at a higher level.
Right.
Like it's when there's a very, like,
Right.
the Halsey House,
Right.
which is in an historic
Right.
district. But if there was a first period
Right.
house, that's
Right.
the oldest house in the village.
Right.
It's not your run-of-the-mill turn-of-the-century house, isn't
Right.
usually called out for individual landmarking,
Right.
as I understand
Right,
it.
right, right. So,
All right, so it can be an area, but you can have levels.
yeah,
I like that. I
Yeah,
like the
yeah,
rankings.
yes.
I think when you see the map, you'll see that it probably was done actually by house and not by street or neighborhood. Because you will see, like Lewis Street, literally, you might have the historic district on two sides of a lot, because they carved out this house as not being historic.
Right.
And you'll see that it's a very house-oriented.
Oh, so it goes
Yes,
in and out.
yeah, it goes in and
Yeah,
out,
yeah,
and drops houses and
Right.
adds them back.
Who did that?
And
I wonder, who did that?
It was done 30 years ago, right?
it was done in '86, and I think the only reason
Right.
that there are more modern houses in some of the historic districts is
Right.
because at that time, you may have had two large houses and a vacant lot.
Right.
So what they did was, they made all three of them the historic district, and then someone in '90 built a house there. So that,
Right.
you'll see when you see the map, it's sort of a very
Like
interesting.
someone built a house in a lot that was vacant, but in the historic district, do they have to follow certain guidelines of the historic district, or?
They were supposed to, but they
Right.
were perhaps not all that well
The good news
adhered to.
is that the body of law around historic preservation is very well developed.
Right.
So
Yeah,
I think,
right,
and I
right.
think, one of the benefits of just bringing someone in who's an expert in that area is just to utilize what's commonly accepted across the state.
Right.
And when one looks at historic district boundaries and designations, that law is very well established too. It's actually fairly clear what the criteria is, and it's done by professional historians.
I'm just curious, do we know who did the '86 mapping?
Who actually did the research?
Might have been Buckhurst, but
Yeah, I think it probably was.
I'm not
Are
certain.
they still operating?
Yeah, but they're sort of not as dominant a firm in that field as they were. There's other firms that have grown up since then, but yeah, they're still around. Interesting, the other thing that's happened, and you saw it, I guess, 2 or 3 years ago, when there were a number of new houses built on Old Town Crossing, I think that is. There are also houses that in '86 they did not think were important or of historic merit. Taste and attitudes change. So there are what are called plain style houses, which are the village historian, Zach Sudenroth, when these houses started to get torn down a few years ago, suddenly said, I think these are actually worth saving. Now, they're not in the current historic, they were not put in the historic district because at the time, in '86, people didn't think that style was worth saving. So part of what's happened is, it's so old that there are things that, and I think when people get surprised, one of the reasons is, in '86 it didn't seem that important. Now, people's views and values have changed, and they might say, gee, I think that is actually a significant house. And so you saw a lot of those type of houses torn down in the last few years that probably, if you had a more up-to-date historic district, might have been viewed differently.
Right, okay. It might have been ranked differently.
Yeah. And so a little bit of what happened at those hearings, if you remember, is, the historian said, I think these are of significance, and sort of people in the ARB said, so what are we supposed to do about that? Because they're not in the district, and they weren't called out, and we don't really have the power to do, it's nice to know, but there's not much we can do about it, right? So one of the reasons why it's become, very complicated, I think, for them.
Okay.
So should I gather comments?
Right.
So if anyone has
Right.
comments, because we can circulate emails around.
It's great. It's great.
Yeah, the outline's fine, just,
I think we haven't gotten
accompanying
ARB comments
materials
back, so that's.
would be helpful.
Laura, do you want to talk a little bit about So I just want to note that one of the other things we're going to be looking at over the next few months is workforce housing, which again was on our original list. And we've been asked again to make sure that that gets on our agenda. And I think also as, there are a number of potential properties that may come in for rezoning over the next few years, such as the existing hospital site. I think the trustees want to hear from us about, doing some review of what might be available or what we can consider for workforce housing as these things happen. So right now, just to give a little preamble, if you're building for example, if you did a 20-unit condo complex in the
Like
village.
Mr. Benedict?
Well, and I don't want to point out anybody in particular, but if you did a complex, there's no provision in the current village code that any of it has to be affordable housing.
No, I know, and that's,
That would be so limited in scope, though. Is the municipality willing to actually invest in...
That's a good question. Right, that's a good question.
in
There are funds
affordable housing
Right,
and rent it out at
Right.
affordable prices for people that work in the village?
Well,
I mean,
Paul, didn't
that's the
you-
only way you're going to get a solution, because you're not going to do it by, okay, so...
Well, there's
they
also
built-
the
how many
granny
units
flat.
get built like that? So you get a couple of units that are affordable, so
Right.
what?
There's the granny flat idea too, where you
Right,
allow an
right.
apartment,
Right.
So what?
where, allowing people to have apartments.
Oh,
so
yeah,
that
yeah.
They can sublet that.
So that goes back to the health issue.
Right.
Yeah, with this issues around that.
Once you have that, then you can start to have an apartment in the village center, which I think would be
Well,
great.
Paul,
Yeah.
I think you had mentioned that 30 years ago there was 80 apartments in the village, in the center, and since since it's no longer the case, couldn't we incorporate putting these new IA systems? Couldn't we say, okay, now we can put these apartments back in the above stores?
Yeah, the publicly health...
it's the health, it's the
That's
health.
right.
We have to put in a sewer system. Once you have
But
a
that's what I just said, with new septic systems, we could do that.
Well, right, so, the county, you're correct. The county has started to license these sort of smaller sewer systems, that we were talking about several years ago.
And that's what
They've
I'm
licensed the first few. I think one of the things that Mark Schiffer brought up at the last meeting was, should we now look at, which may be one of the ways to sort of deal with affordable housing, doing, providing for those in the village center, the village putting some of the money
I'm
in
gonna put a
if
caveat.
people do affordable housing.
I'm going to put a caveat,
Okay?
because those still going to be private property. And
Right.
I hardly think they're going to be renting out these nice apartments on top of the stores in the village center at very affordable prices. I'd be very surprised.
Well, it depends on whether, as you said before, it depends on whether the village is willing to
There
invest
can
at
be
all.
incentives.
Correct, right?
I mean,
Right.
if it's a municipality
Right.
owned structure, then they can do whatever they want.
correct.
Right.
The village and it's going to have to be bonds, so the village as a whole
Right.
will have to be behind it.
Right,
But that-
or the town,
or the
because the town actually has authority, right, to create affordable units.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
That's
I
not
guess
it.
so.
That's not it.
Because
Ms.
right
Weir?
now, right now, we're having a big problem. People that work here have to travel hours. to
Right,
get here.
literally hours, yeah, the trade parade. Yeah, even coming in tonight, the trade parade was unbelievable.
Really?
Watching the number of people who are driving west because they can't live here.
But I think it's important to look at incorporating both the upgrade system and the putting the apartments above it. And that's,
Right, right.
We can do that.
Right.
We can incorporate both of those.
Right,
things.
right.
There are some laws that say that, development of X amount of size, 30% of it or something.
Correct.
I think it's 20%.
Is it 20% has to be set aside for,
Right.
Well, they can,
They do that in New York City.
I'm sorry?
well, they can pay a fine in lieu. So
No, I know, they can, okay, if they don't want to do the development
Yeah.
for that.
They can pay into a fund.
take the money and put it in a fund. Now, I know that the village used to have a fund. They had a trust fund that was
Right.
started in 2003, I believe, but
Right.
it's been closed.
Right.
So if there is development, like on the scale that you were talking about, Eduardo, 20 units or whoever was talking about, it,
Right.
20 units or something, I don't know, I think that let's reenact this fund, and let's make that part of the
Well,
code.
that's one, so I think we want to start to look at what are the options, and these are all different, towns have used many, people have used many options. One is, when you build, and they vary. So in the Bay Area now, if you build anything above a certain cost, you have to pay into an affordable housing fund, period.
Yeah.
Anything above X dollars, you pay into the affordable
Well,
housing fund.
I would probably suggest.
Right, that's the most extreme. There are
Yeah.
towns, many towns, including many in Nassau County now, where if you build, multiple units at once, you have to provide an affordable unit or, whatever the proportion is. That doesn't create a lot of units, but it creates some units. And then the other is the village or the town or both, beginning to invest in actual units being created,
Right.
whether in the village center or elsewhere.
But that, as Eduardo points
Right.
out, that would have to be, municipal-owned property.
Right.
It can be subsidy,
It can be subsidy.
Well, it could be subsidy,
or it can be tax.
Right.
tax incentive, I mean, it could be,
Ownership.
but that's, yeah. But it's nice to have a fund to work with,
Right.
even for purchasing,
Right.
because that fund can go both
Well,
ways.
there was that thing that Fred Pickleby, he was going to put forth, the CPF
Right.
for the down payment or something like we're going to do another fund similar to CPF.
Right, he was proposing to do a CPF-type fund for affordable housing, though that hasn't been approved yet.
No,
Who is proposing that?
Fred Thiel, the state.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well, I guess Kimberly Allen seems to be fairly gung-ho about this.
right,
And she's a trustee.
right.
So,
And the mayor's been asking about, sort of what the tools might be that the village could use.
so I guess it would be just, probably sitting down with Diana Weir at the
Right.
town,
Right,
Or Bonnie or Curtis.
right,
and Curtis.
right.
But Kimberly, I sort of asked her about that, and she said that, they have an agenda to get things done first. So
Right, but we've been asked now to look at it. And the town certainly has become more active in providing affordable housing than it was. It's become, both towns, I would say, East Hampton and Southampton have now been
Well, the
beginning to focus more.
village could adopt what the town has, that the accessory apartment law that Eldon pointed out.
Right.
So they could do that now.
Where's the
Right.
town focusing, like in Riverhead?
Well, I think they're trying to provide units throughout the town, but they've been focusing, I would say, generally west of the canal. In
They
general.
have Cindy Hollow.
Yeah. That's been the focus. Partially land is, look, from their point of view, land is much less expensive. It's a little less expensive to build a unit. It may not be as politically difficult to build a unit as it is here. So there's, I think, lots of reasons why the town might decide, gee, I'd rather focus this in west of the canal than east. Very expensive per unit here, obviously, but that doesn't mean there's not need. When the shopping center got turned down on the highway, and this is, I think, actually a very important part of the affordable housing issue here. One of the things I think the town board, I give them a lot of credit for, said is if we're going to do something here instead of shopping center,
To affordable housing?
let's do affordable housing and particularly affordable senior housing.
senior housing, they were really talking
And
about.
that's, if you look at the demographics, particularly the village, we are aging really fast. And there's no affordable senior housing here. None. And I'm not talking about, assisted living, I'm talking about just housing, right? If you were 65 or over, there's no affordable housing.
Well, it's sort of what they got, a retirement community.
Yeah,
Right.
want to put another caveat
Right.
here, because probably many of these seniors own their homes here.
Right.
And if they sell their homes here, they're going to have plenty of money to...
Sure, and that's a whole other market, correct. But there's obviously seniors who
Who don't.
either don't own their homes or their homes are heavily indebted or whatever, and there's very few options out here.
Yeah.
So that's a whole other piece. I mean, I think the affordable housing issues here are both sort of at either end of the spectrum. Those families starting out for which there's literally no options.
Right.
And you see the impact on firemen and policemen, people like that, no longer living here because they can't.
Right.
And then you see it at the other end, which is people older whose income become more limited, and it's very hard to live here.
Yeah.
So, And both of those are actually, interesting enough, growing populations here. The population of the middle has really shrunk here. So.
And if they sell their home, yeah, they make the money, but they don't have a place to downsize.
Right, and they end up leaving.
Affordably, yeah.
Because they can't, like, there's no option here, like, I'm gonna sell my house and I can rent a inexpensive apartment, which you might have in another
Or
town.
buy a
Right,
small apartment.
right,
and
right,
so
right.
keep some of that money for
Right.
my old age. and
Right,
have a place
correct.
to live.
You really don't have that option, so, that's what's been happening with locals, as we know, they sell their house, they move to North Carolina, right? Because they can buy a house for $200,000-$300,000, and that's more affordable for a senior than buying a house for $2 million because they sold the house for $3 million, right? That's not really solving the problem, so.
Right.
Well, I'll go talk to Diana Weir and get the town code on.
Right.
We'll start there,
Right, right,
if that's okay.
So I propose a condominium in the parking lot,
right.
Which parking lot?
the
Big
central
one,
one,
yeah,
Which one?
the big one,
right.
The
behind Main
big one
Street,
with,
Little- on West Main.
what are you gonna do with all these cars?
Oh, there's plenty of parking,
The parking actually
We'll
now
have
is
Uber.
very inefficient.
We'll have Uber soon.
Right.
We have Uber.
plenty of parking.
But it's also very inefficient right now.
I know
You could
it is,
definitely
I know it is.
fit
Make it more efficient, and you block a piece off,
Right.
you put stores underneath, it'd be beautiful.
Right, yeah.
Well, I've
And
seen,
West Main Street.
you know those
become
properties
vibrant.
across from the Union Cantina?
Right,
It's like begging.
right, right. Well, I think when we were looking at North Sea Road,
Yeah.
I think one of the comments I heard from everybody here, when the trustees asked us to look at it, was people were not that excited about retail rezoning. but that-
Multifamily.
But it was a really obvious place where you could do multifamily housing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really obvious. It's
Really?
very close to the
Yeah,
village.
I know.
You have large lots, you could really do
Right there.
multifamily there.
Yeah, I know. It's perfect.
And that's I think, where the village has not been aggressive about looking at affordable housing opportunities. Right?
But the CPF really sort of hinders them.
You can't use CPF money.
No, you can't. So that's why
Right.
any developer who's doing a multi-unit thing, having a trust fund
Right, right,
makes sense so that the village can do something.
right, right,
Yeah,
right.
but how are you gonna fund it? You need a lot of money.
Well, presumably, Eduardo, it would be invested.
To be invested.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it just doesn't sit there.
No, I mean, money has to flow in, where will it come from?
Well, from developers doing large projects.
Not enough of it. You need a lot of.
It's going to take a while, and that's why the town, I think, has to be a partner in it.
Well,
because I
it's
don't
really
think the
too
village
bad that we
itself-
missed the boat on like that whole thing down on whatever lane that is that goes where, what's his name, Giano had bought all that land, there.
I mean, Old Town?
Yeah, Old Town.
But right, that would be a good example.
I mean,
Like,
oh my gosh,
So in a lot of towns, if you did something like that, you'd be required to pay into a fund. Right,
absolutely.
we've never done that here.
Yeah, I
It already
know.
pays in the CPF, so it already paid into the CPF.
It doesn't, it doesn't,
Like the houses that then get sold, and it already goes in the CPF, so
Right.
it would be like double dipping.
I'm not saying it should be for that one, I'm just saying these are things other towns
Oh,
have
these are
done.
things that happened that we could have taken advantage
Right.
of.
So a number of towns down the North Shore of Long Island, not Nassau County, I should say, now provide, if you spend over a certain amount of money on a house, a certain piece of it has to be put into a fund for affordable housing. I mean, theory
Really?
that's the only way they're going to be able to start to build affordable housing funds.
Well, yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that that's really key to this.
Right.
Okay, for
So-
the village especially.
But you're right, revenue's tough.
Yeah,
Right.
revenue's
People want a
tough.
lot more taxes.
And the town has much more binding authority than the village has really
Yes.
limited authority. So
Yeah.
again, I think part of the problem here is you can't, I think it's very hard to do without the town. Because the town has much more significant tools than we do.
You're gonna need a municipality behind this.
Right,
Otherwise,
right.
it's not gonna get done.
No, I know, absolutely you do.
Right.
Well, how do you do that with jurisdiction? I mean, the village and the town.
Well, the question is whether we as the planning commission can reach out to the town in a different way, because we're not reaching out in a political way, but rather as, from a planning point of view, how can we put together something that maybe would...
Be a partnership type of deal?
Right, right.
Okay. All right.
intermunicipal agreement.
Right.
I'm sorry?
So where are we on the
Intermunicipal
other,
agreement.
this other, like, this general initiatives? I know Ed was working on dark skies, so we'll probably
Right,
discuss that tonight.
I think hopefully when he's
Yeah.
at the next meeting, hopefully we'll have a draft for us.
Right. And then we,
Right, and then the fourth item, which I think one of the reasons I wanted to start talking about affordable housing, I think will relate to it, is, sort of being proactive about looking at what might be the right approach to the planning and zoning for the hospital site. Now that the merger has happened, and I think it's fairly official at this point that they will build a new hospital on the Southampton College campus.
Yeah, the Stony Brook.
The Stony Brook
Who
Southampton.
does the hospital belong to? Belongs to the hospital.
Now it's part of Stony Brook.
So it would have to be sold to
They-
whoever.
right, and they probably will sell it.
I mean, they will, I think, in fact, the plan that they filed with the state, they are assuming that funding from the sale of that land will be part of how they pay for a new hospital.
Right, so if it gets sold to a private developer, what kind of,
Well, right now, it's zoned to be a hospital. So, they're going to come into the village clearly at some point for
Land review.
rezoning.
Yeah.
It's actually, zoning right now would either be hospital or single-family home. Obviously, I don't think any developer's going to want to tear that building down.
Well, is
So they're going to want to do something different than what's in the current zoning.
there any protection for the original when you're the hospital?
Currently, I don't think so.
But it should be.
Well, so those are all the issues that I think, and the idea is rather than have a developer come in and then argue, maybe be proactive about things the village would like to see, so when they sell it to a developer, they can give a developer some guidance of like, these are the things that the village is likely to approve. I mean, obviously, we don't have power ultimately who they sell it to, but we could create zoning for that site.
Well, and we could have weight. I mean, the village could have weight.
And that's, I think, the reason I brought up affordable housing is that's a very good example. I mean, there could be,
Yeah,
60
no.
units on
Yeah,
that
I
site
know,
at the
I
end of the
get it.
day, if you take all the property the hospital owns. If none of them are affordable, that seems like a terribly missed
Well,
opportunity.
okay.
the municipality would have to buy it then to do that.
Not
Not
necessarily.
necessarily.
You can do it through entitlement.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's customary in zoning in many places that, they
There's a
say...
lot of grants you can get for the state. and the
Yeah,
county.
if you're going to do units of a certain type, you have to provide a certain number of affordable units. That's pretty customary now. I'm not saying that's the right approach. I'm just saying, or maybe you say, look, we'll let you do 30 units. That would be also very common. We'll let you do 30 units, or you can do 40 if you do some affordable units. That sort of approach has been used a
right.
lot. Right?
But who owns the property where the market was supposed to be, the supermarket?
That was sold, I think.
Yeah. Glennon?
Yeah, it's a developer.
That
Yeah.
was sold.
No, not that market. The big supermarket that was voted down. Who owns that?
Oh,
That's still owned by the private owners, Morrow and his
Morrow,
partners.
is it really?
Part of it was given to CPF, or part of it
They
was
haven't
sold to
decided
CPF.
what to do with it.
Yeah, there's thought of some of it being sold to the
And it
CPF.
was, part of
Really?
it was.
Yeah, and then one of the things they have been talking about is potentially senior housing on that site.
Who are they talking to?
I don't know. That's the town.
Is
So-
it the town?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
the town.
town.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not the village.
Huh, okay. That's a huge piece of property.
Correct.
Okay.
So let me bring up one last item as delicately as I can. So the village attorney contacted me because there are charts that are going around.
Oh, I have them.
Right, and asked us to do a review. Obviously, it's a little bit, obviously it's been prepared by a member of the commission, so I don't think we should be, I don't want to make any editorial comment on the charts or anything like that, because I think it's the right of anyone on the commission to obviously express their views. But he did ask us to look at whether, to look at the math. And I guess two things I would bring up. I believe in the current code, the accessory buildings are not counted in the 60, 80, and 120 zone. I'm pretty sure of that because I've read it now about 22 times, to be certain, yeah. So it was just,
Yeah,
yes,
really?
yeah, it was just applied in the, up to R40.
Oh, okay.
So I just would comment that the chart actually show, the chart needs to be changed to show that in those zones, in fact.
The only other thing that we should look at in the chart, because I looked at it too
Right,
ago,
right.
is we should really, to be fair, look at the area in a house that's not part of GFA,
Right.
i.e. basements and parts of attic.
Right.
Because,
And attached garages.
and 500 square feet for attached garage.
No, because it's not part of the zone.
Well, but it's,
GFA is GFA,
but when a house is marketed for size,
but that's,
you look, you can do two
that's
for
just
basement.
market, that's just marketing. But GFA is GFA, so this has to reflect GFA. It can't take into
No,
consideration.
you can't take it into
imponderables.
consideration because it's, if you're going to have like a 5-bedroom house, you might have 3 bedrooms in the basement, 2 and the upstairs, and it could be a, 4,000-foot house. But it might be that only, generally, because I asked the building department, or we got information from the building department, that generally a third of the area of the house is non-GFA area, most of which is basement.
Listen, I have a basement, it's not finished.
Right, but that's what
I
people
don't,
are
I
doing.
don't, I don't have an attic.
Yeah.
So
This is
these are,
back to just
these are
like-
imponderables that cannot go into a comparison of GFA, which is part of zoning.
Well,
You have to- you have
except
to use
you
the
also, well, if you do that, I agree with you, but if you do that, then I would make 2 comments. One is, obviously, which is not clear from the chart, in our village, we exclude a garage. So when you say accessory buildings, that obviously is not a garage.
Not anymore.
So accessory buildings in
In
this village...
fact, if you look, the percentage I use is very small.
Right, but accessory, so most houses in the smaller zones do not have accessory buildings, never did. So it's,
No, that's not true, because the big hullabaloo was about the pool houses.
which was
going-
very recent.
Well, the pool houses going on the small lot,
Right,
even on the smallest lot. So that's not true what I
Right.
just said. If somebody still wants a pool house, he's got to take that off the GFA.
correct, but, okay.
In my case, I have a shed,
Right.
which is 80 square feet.
Right,
And if
right.
this passes, I'm beyond.
Well, right,
And I
except,
could not even increase my shed without going to the ZBA.
except in...
Well, you'd have to show hardship.
Right, you have to
For
show
a
hardship.
shed.
Right, right. But I mean, right now, you're saying the average R20 house has 240 square feet of accessory buildings. I don't think that's correct. I think that's...
It can
It
happen.
could, but...
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying what can be done.
Right, but just to Eldon's
Or
point...
what would be done if you
Right, but
put...
just to Eldon, but let me then go to Eldon's point, because this is where I think you're flawed.
All right.
Most houses being built now, I would say 90% of them, according to the building department, have finished basements with bedrooms in them.
Oh.
So when you say that doesn't count, it does count, because if you look at most houses, in fact, in our village, as opposed to other villages where they are counted in GFA, you have bigger houses than you would have elsewhere, because since we don't count them, people now finish basements and put bedrooms in them. So when we call something a 3,000 square foot house, in Bridgehampton, in East Hampton, that would be called a 4,000 square foot.
I don't agree with you. Absolutely.
That it
not.
wouldn't be called a 4,000 square foot house in those
No,
villages?
I don't agree with you, because regardless, if they make a comparison, you have to make a comparison on the zoning, not on the imponderables.
I agree with you. So I think the way we had done the chart, because we thought it was what was fair, was we looked at pure GFA of a house.
Right.
And that's what we presented to the trustees.
Right.
Which is,
And this is a pure GFA of the house.
okay.
And we did, remember we talked, we've been talking about this for a long time, we
Is
did
it-
talk
is
about
it-
No.
whether basements should be included,
No,
and we
it's
decided
not.
that was
I mean, it's
not
not.
a good idea.
Well, so what we did, again, what we presented to trustees, because we're trying to be very careful and very scientific, was you're allowed a certain GFA in a house, now it's going to be this much less, and it ranged from, I think, about 6% to 15%, depending on the size of the house. What this does, and I think if you, either it's purely apples or it's apples and oranges. You have to decide. So what this does is say, well, you might have built an accessory building of 400 feet, so you've actually been reduced by 90%.
That's right.
But in fact, no one does that,
Well, that's not true.
right?
That's not true.
But
People
that's an
build pool houses.
imponderable.
That's an imponderable.
That's an imponderable house, and you're talking about imponderables. Finished basements are not imponderable. Finished basements are the rule of the day.
I'm saying what house you can build if you want to put accessory structure on your property. Because right now you're taking off GFA if you put an accessory structure. So that has to be shown as well. It can be more.
Well, you can add basements then. Add basements.
No, because
Why?
basements are not part of the zoning, but structures are.
But that is your view, and you have a right to your view. I just am pointing out that what we did, what I was trying to do, honestly,
This chart clearly shows what you can and cannot do with your property.
in your view.
No, in the
your
zoning.
view.
In the zoning.
Well,
In the zoning.
but the zoning also allows you to build a basement, right?
The zoning does not tell you that you count it in GFA.
It tells you that you don't.
It does not
Because
tell you
you
that you
don't.
can build a basement. It tells you you have a basement and you can finish it or not finish it. It doesn't tell you whether you should or you shouldn't.
No, but it doesn't tell you you should or shouldn't build an accessory building.
Yeah.
But most people do.
Well, most people finish their basement.
Well, a lot of people, the whole...
Do me a favor.
All right, if you're gonna do one, you gotta do the
The
other.
whole question that came up about the accessory, so take off the rule about the accessory structures if
No.
nobody's building accessory structures.
We were, the rule was proactive.
No, the rule was because you're complaining about pool houses.
no, the rule
You're
was-
complaining about too many structures going on the back, in the backyard.
And smaller
people,
lots.
people are building pool houses, and the pool houses are 200 square feet or more.
I thought the idea was that people have the choice.
They have a choice.
They
And
do.
that's right. And here it shows that if you want to put a pool house, it comes out
But you
in
can, but you
GFA.
can build out your basement.
Right?
So what?
But
But
I
it's
did
not in
do-
the G.
No, it's
part
not
of
in your
GFA.
chart.
It's not part of GFA.
Right. But it is part of the impact of the house.
It's
environment.
not, the basement is part of the impact of the house. It's not part of the GFA. This is about the GFA.
But when I did take your exact numbers, and when I just, for the record, because whether you want to agree or not, when I put the basement in, basically the range was from 6% on the small houses to 15% on very large
Listen.
lots. No, just
Change the zoning and include the basement, increase how many GFA you can have and put
No,
in
but
the
just for-
basement. Then we can have that argument.
No, it's not an argument. I'm just
But
saying
as
what
long
the numbers came out
as
as.
long as the basement is not part of GFA, it does not go into
My
any kind of
point is that
GFA.
the actual, if you look at it the way I'm suggesting, which
You
you
know,
don't
a
have
lot
to.
of people look at it, they say, oh, the attic, the attic is so many.
No, all I'm saying
Most
is
people
that,
don't use an attic.
that-
for living.
that-
Well, that's because they want 10, 11-foot
no,
ceilings.
my point is the majority of new
They
houses being
could.
built are using about a third of the area is additional, and that's the number I got from the building department. So just if you look at that number, which you don't have to, I'm just saying if you did, this change would be about 5 or 6% on small lots, up to as high as 15% on large lots. The average being about 10%.
Listen, the net
So I'm just
change,
saying this.
the net change on the GFA of the house, of the structure, not the basement, not the attic, the net
Not
change,
the attached garage.
the net change on the change in the GFA in the structure is what is being reflected there.
The net,
Now,
the
if-
average net change is 10%
No,
of all built area.
on the GFA, the net change of the GFA, people gotta know that they can build on a half an acre lot, 400 square feet less of a house, and if they want to
Not of
put...
a house. Not of a house.
Of
Not
the
of a house.
GFA.
That's where we
Of the
disagree,
GFA.
Eduardo. Not of a house. That's what your chart mixes apples and
What are
oranges.
you talking about?
Accessory building.
I'm not talking about accessory.
So this,
On a
so what-
half acre,
right?
you go from 3,900 to 3,500.
Correct.
So that's 400
Right.
square feet, what I
Correct.
just said.
That we agree on. So
Okay,
that
so I
side of
just
the
said
chart
that.
we agree
I
on.
just said that. And if you want to put a pool house on a half acre, I figure 195 square feet for a pool house. So that's going to mean that your house is going to be 3,305.
Now you're at apples and oranges.
No, I'm not apples
Yes,
and no,
yes.
because in the zoning, you specifically...
But you don't mention, by the way, because I think it was not your point,
What?
that in fact, you're not building 3,500 feet, you're building 3,500 plus 520 because the garage isn't counted, right?
No.
Yeah, you're right.
Yes!
No.
Absolutely yes!
No,
Yes.
it's not
No,
GFA.
you're wrong.
not
But it's
GFA.
structure.
It's
It's
not
structure.
GFA.
But Eduardo, is it structure?
It's not GFA.
So-
This is
okay,
GFA. Gross floor area.
Okay.
the
We
size of
disagree.
the home.
Look, you have a right to your point of view.
Listen,
I'm just
I
saying.
have a detached garage.
Right.
That goes into my GFA?
No.
No. Does that go into my structure?
Yes.
No, it doesn't. It's a detached garage.
It's still a structure.
It doesn't go into my home structure.
Right.
Because you're just talking about.
So I agree
right now
with
you're
you.
talking
So
about-
let me tell you
right
what
now,
we-
right
what
now, right now you're talking about bulk.
No.
Yes.
Okay,
You're
so.
talking about bulk, not
So let me
GFA.
tell you why we did our chart the way we did.
What chart?
The chart we presented to the trustees was very careful and I think very scientific and was not an opinion. It was just fact. It was the GFA has been reduced by X square feet. What you've done here is perfectly fine. It's an opinion.
It's not an opinion,
Yes,
it's a
it
fact.
is.
It's
No,
an
because it
opinion.
doesn't reflect the garage.
It's not supposed
It doesn't
to reflect the garage.
Because that's your view.
No, it's not my view.
Yes,
It's
it
the
is your
zoning.
view.
It's the
It
zoning.
is your view.
It's the zoning.
That's what we
It's your
disagree.
It's the zoning.
It's
interpretation
your
of that.
It's not my interpretation, it's the zoning.
So what
your
we do is
interpretation.
interpretation, what you do is
It's
fact.
not interpretation, it's the GFA.
But
No, it isn't.
What is it? It's
All right,
GFA.
so Eduardo, let me actually try to put it a different way to you. We've changed over the last 10 years 20 different things. Side yards, pyramid law, other things, right? Accessory buildings was one of those changes over the last 10 years.
In the last year.
Right, but over the last 10 years, we've changed several things. Under CMAC, now under the new board, we've changed many things, right? There's been a reform of the
Most
zoning.
changes that were done before were really positive changes.
With what authority are
Whether
you?
they're positive or negative, we've changed many things.
So?
The change we've proposed now is one item. It is the GFA of a house, right? And what we showed the chart to the
2%.
trustees was very clear and very precise. It was, this is, if you had a house of 3,300 feet, you can have 3,900 feet, you can now build 3,500, right? And it ranged, as Eldon said, up to 15% for the largest houses. That was the impact. Very clear, not trying to hide it from anyone.
Right.
Very clear. And I really think why I was sent this chart, honestly, is it starts to get confused when you talk about other things that you can or can't do. So, for example, there are many people in the village who would believe the pyramid law has reduced how much you can build on a lot. But we don't look at it that way. We just look at the only change that is being proposed right now is to change the GFA by a certain percentage.
Right, and you also propose accessory structures which affect the GFA.
I didn't do that. That was
You
done
didn't do
6
it.
months ago, a year ago.
So
That's not
what?
what's before the trustees
So
now.
what? It still affects the GFA.
So we also made a decision, but
What you did, you did,
No, Eduardo.
you did a double dipping.
No,
This
no, I
is a
didn't.
double, yes, you
No, I
did a double
didn't.
dipping, yes.
That's your opinion.
Because
That's
the
your
structures
opinion.
were included in the GFA for the purpose
But
of
we didn't do it.
of reducing the sizes of the
But let
homes.
me-
Not only did you do
Do
that,
you realize, Eduardo,
But now-
that you are the only one here that, and on what authority are you saying this? Are you saying this?
What authority?
What authority are you proposing this
authority.
to the world? I'm curious, what authority? What
what
authority?
authority?
Well, I'm
There's a
just
right, he has a
curious.
right as a person to say what he
Okay, but
feels.
as a person, right?
Right.
But you're saying that this is fact.
it is a fact.
But it's
you.
also a fact that we decided, which you don't mention here, we decided as a commission, even though in the report it was one of the options, that we would not change the zoning, as many other people have done, to include the basement, right? We made a decision, we didn't want to do that.
Or interior
So I guess
garages.
the point is, we made a fairly modest change.
If you included the basement, you'd have to increase the GFA.
Correct, correct.
It's
But-
already-
So it would have been the same net
No, no,
effect.
not necessarily.
Oh, yeah. Would have been the same net effect.
No, no.
Yes, it would have been the same net
What about
effect.
the attached
You
garages?
cannot include the basement and expect somebody to build a house.
What about the attached garages? They're not included.
They've never been included.
The only
Well, they
thing I
should
would say is,
be. I mean, that's my
Well,
opinion.
that's fine, but they're not. So I reflect the GFA that's on the zoning.
Right.
Well,
So I
based
guess
on your
just-
own personal
just-
little flag law, right?
Right, so my only
Your
concern,
personal
so
little
just,
flag law.
just the only concern
It's
I
going to
have is,
become
look, you have a
non-conforming.
right to your view, you have a right to present it the way you want. I think once we, on either side, once we go beyond pure pure what we're suggesting, the proposal before the trustees has nothing to do with accessory building. It has nothing to do with it.
Of course it does. It affects
No,
the
it
GFA.
doesn't. No, that's
It also
not what
affects
they're
the
voting
GFA.
on.
But it doesn't matter. The people need to know about it. The people need to know that not only is the GFA being reduced in the house, but it's being further reduced by the structures that go
Wait,
on the
that's
on the
You
lot.
know what, they'll
That's
mostly
incorrect.
have, most
That was
of
done
them
6 months
cheer.
ago.
So what?
Most of
And
them
on
will
top of
cheer.
that, you're reducing the GFA. So, yeah, two,
We haven't even talked
two
about
ways.
why.
should say that.
Right.
We haven't talked about why
Say
this
it
is
that way.
happening, which is that there's, been a large amount of people who feel that these houses are too large, which is what we found in this study with Glennis. So if we're talking about a 10 or 12% reduction, it seems to be fairly modest compared to, for example, East Hampton, which is about 20% less for those lots. So this is basically a compromise position that's
It
much
is
less than
I
what
think
East
it's
Hampton
hardly a
forces.
compromise because you go across the board,
I think it's very, I
all
think it's
over the
pretty
village,
modest.
even on 5-acre lots. I mean, it's hardly a compromise.
Well,
And
we
and you're not focusing on where the issues were, which is a small lot. You're focusing
But that's not what the study said.
That's
Eduardo, look,
wrong.
you have a right to
You are
your
wrong.
view of where you think the issues are, but we did do a study, we did do 2 years of workshops. Your view that the issue is only in the small lots is a view you have a right to, but it's not what the study said.
No.
It's not what people said in the workshops. So you have a right to your view, but this did not
In the
come out of our heads.
workshops, nobody talked about the lots that are over 3 acres.
No, they talked about larger lots.
No, nobody talked about larger
You're
lots.
wrong.
We did, we said.
We did.
Yes, we did.
You
Yes, we
did,
did.
not the workshops, not the people.
Yes, they did.
All right, go to the architects and really ask them whether they feel that on a
We did.
one on a
They were at the
1 acre lot.
meetings.
No,
A lot of things, we heard, which I thought was very interesting from a lot of the builders, why don't you just reduce the GFA and give me simple regulations and let me know what the change is,
Right.
so I can keep doing my business.
let the public know what the reduction is.
Which we have.
We did.
Paul,
We
No,
did.
the public
what
doesn't
is
know.
But I think you are insinuating without a doubt that you think we were not clear, and what we thought we were.
I don't think most people know what's going on.
I disagree.
Oh, well, you tried to change that.
Right.
Well, I'm just informing, that's all.
And you don't include us in your conversation.
Going to include you in my it's public.
Well, this
You
is
have
public.
it, so you're included.
Yeah, this is public, I
You're
know.
included.
Yeah, okay. Paul, but the
Right.
upshot is that the trustees asked us to comment?
Right, so
on
our
this?
comment's purely going to be that, we're going to be commenting 2 things. I want to be very open about it. Number one, the chart is not accurate in terms of how the accessory buildings work, which I
Okay.
think you'll probably change anyway. 60, 80, and 120, you don't include the accessory buildings. So it's overestimating the change in those districts. And then secondly, it's our belief, which Mr. Simeone does not agree with, that either you look at pure GFA or you look at total size, that those are the 2 options. And you could look at accessory buildings, but if you're looking at that, you should also look at basements and other things, and the garage and the total amount of space you're allowed to build on a lot.
But what we are proposing is a
Right.
GFA, it's not size, it's a GFA.
Well, I think there are 2 things you could do. You could look at the GFA, which is what the chart we presented to trustees,
Right.
which goes from, I think, 4%
And
to 15%.
that's what that interim law addressed.
And that's what the law says. The law literally, if you read the text,
Right.
it just talks about
GFA.
GFA.
That's
Real
correct.
simple.
And so that,
And then the other way to look at it, which, there's many different views on, you could say, but really, you could say, as Eduardo's saying, but that's not accurate because you've also cut back in the last 2 years on accessory structures.
okay.
Other people could say, yeah, but that's not accurate because you also don't count basements and other towns count basements. You could also say other towns count garages and we don't count garages.
Well,
one of the
if we
reasons-
are-
Looking at other towns.
Okay,
We're
if
looking
we
at
are-
South
Correct. So what I did to make it very simple, because that's all the law that's before the trustees now.
That's, we want to
right,
address that law that
is-
was written.
Right,
blah,
that was
blah.
written, which is changing the GFA to go from,
And this is
12
this
to
is the
10.
second change to the GFA. So the accessory structures also change the GFA.
but that's voted on 6 months ago.
That's
But
done,
this
done
is a
deal,
second
done.
change. Well, it's a second change to the GFA, so it's on top of a change that was already made, and that's what's being reflected there, that there's been 2 changes to the GFA. Well, there's been 1 change to the GFA and 1 proposed change to the GFA. So there's 2 changes to the GFA.
And then other things
Correct.
we've also changed, right? So for
But, we're
example,
talking
when you,
GFA now. We're talking
but let me
GFA
give you an
now.
example of why this chart is so difficult. So you talk about historical GFA.
Right.
Historical GFA included the garage. Right.
No.
Yes, it
no.
did. Absolutely did. Absolutely did. That's what we changed. We all agreed to change it because we wanted detached garages. That was a change made from the way the historical GFA
No,
worked.
No, 'cause no.
I just,
I don't
No,
think we're gonna
because
get it.
Right.
I think that what we do, what we need to take
Well,
away
The one
here,
you're looking at,
is the original code
the original code said you take,
in a district.
the original code said
Right.
you take the building envelope
Right.
between the setbacks,
Correct.
and you can build whatever you want in that envelope. It didn't say GFA.
Right, correct.
All right? And that quantified to those square feet that I'm putting in
And
there.
the garage was included in
Of
that.
course, but
Right.
it was not GFA.
But
It was-
so,
it-
let me be
but
clear,
stop.
when you say this
It
amount
was-
of square footage,
I say comprehensive, okay, maybe we should talk square footage instead of GFA.
Right.
Okay? Because, but it's the same thing.
no, it's not. So let me make my point. So if you say the square footage was 15,000, and then it was 12,000, and then it was 4,500. The difference is, we specifically in the new zoning excluded the garage from the
All right,
calculations.
no problem.
Right?
So this is square
But
footage.
that's why using the historical makes no sense.
Yes, it does.
Right.
Yes, it does.
Because it was totally different, the way it was
It
done.
was done by the envelope.
Right,
And in that
correct.
envelope, you could build whatever you wanted.
Right, no
Okay?
pyramid, no, none of that stuff.
Whatever
Right.
you wanted. My footprint is
Right.
2,500 square feet. If I wanted to, I could have built a 5,000 square foot house based on the way it was done back then. And I got 5,000.
Structure.
Yeah, the structure.
Including garage.
The structure.
Right,
5,000 square feet.
right.
Okay, so
Right.
that's all I'm saying. But it was reduced significantly from them.
Right,
All
but
right.
in that reduction, we excluded the garage.
So what? It was reduced.
What do you mean, so what?
What do you
That's
mean,
part of the
so what?
math.
That's
It
part
was
of your
reduced
numbers.
significantly, okay,
Right.
from what it used to be
Right.
able to do.
Right, but you don't mention there that in doing that, we excluded the garage. Right,
So anyway,
Right,
so I guess
right.
that the commission basically, and Eduardo, you are part of the commission,
Right.
correct?
right.
So that we are going to address again on March 8th,
Right.
the trustees, that we have reviewed Eduardo's charts, and we have discussed
And our
them.
only comment is on the math, that we think the most appropriate
And-
math is to look at pure GFA. That's all we're going to say.
And also in regards to the...
And you'll disagree, obviously.
And in regards, excuse me, can I go on?
Yeah.
That in regards to the draft law,
Right.
that the planning commission is standing behind that.
I don't think, right, although they haven't asked that. All they've asked is, do we have any, because this was submitted, do we have any comments? So,
Well, that's our comment.
right, right.
Well, this was fun.
Right. Well, I think it's important, and honestly, I think, to be very open, what I am upset about is we've spent 2 years, done a study, had workshops. That is the right planning process. I have no issue with, any of us can disagree with what comes out of those workshops and the study and all that, but I think if it is represented as this is some crazy radical thing that was done, that's not fair. That's just not fair. It's just not fair. It's not correct. It's not fair. It's not some crazy radical
not
thing. It
accurate.
was after 2 years of work and study.
Listen,
And that doesn't mean it's right.
Listen, what you proposed, the 10% plus 1,500, was a half-hour presentation, proposal, and vote. There was
Was
no,
included
there was
as
no,
It was in Glynis's
there
study.
was no real,
Been in the record for 2 years.
she didn't propose 10%
But she proposed
1,500.
more.
She
One of them was
Yeah,
greater
that's
than
right.
that.
And there was
That's
really
right.
no,
It's the
and there was
compromise
really no
position.
discussion. But
That's
that
right.
doesn't mean,
We studied
that
all
doesn't-
kinds of
should be.
that doesn't mean
positions.
because she's proposing it, that's what should be done.
You're right. Absolutely right.
And we didn't, and we
Of
didn't.
course you did.
No, we did not.
Yeah.
No, we did not.
No, she had 3 or 4 options, some of which were much more,
Absolutely.
had much more impact.
And more lenient.
Absolutely.
They were
Well,
more
that had
lenient, and we picked something in
driveways
the middle, right?
included and garages.
That doesn't mean you picked the right thing.
What do
No, I
you
totally
mean
agree with
you?
you. We're not saying we picked the
You-
right thing. I think what is not being presented, perhaps, is that we picked something based on extensive study and public outreach. It wasn't just out of our heads,
No, it
right?
wasn't.
Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. That's all that I would
And
hope
part
would
of,
be
I mean,
represented.
not every homeowner uses this law and these percentages in this zoning and applies it to their own little piece of earth. I mean, there's a whole village out there, it's
And
not
our job
not just
is-
you.
Well,
There's
no,
a
I would put it
whole
differently. Our
village
job
out
at the commission is to look at the community character and see, is this the right way to deal with it or not? And we may be wrong, without a doubt.
Of course you could.
But it wasn't, but it was, we are trying, I think, as opposed to in the past, we're trying to do it based on analysis and study and research and outreach. We're not
But
just
you know, you
saying,
could have somebody else doing the analysis with a different conclusion, too.
Well,
So, you know,
obviously.
It depends on the outcome.
I don't think there's any one person in this commission who picked this consultant. We did it as a group.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, we did.
So-
In fact, I pitched somebody else.
What was how much bigger were the houses in the last 10 years? That we were showing how the houses had gotten much
Between
bigger.
150 and 500%.
Right. So we're addressing a real
Right.
condition that's existing.
We're talking about a
Well, there
15%
was-
difference.
There was public uproar. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
So why are you worried about me?
Why are we
We're not worried about
you?
anybody. I just
Well,
don't.
I don't know, because it seems kind of I'm not going to say underhanded, but it seems kind of left-handed.
What?
I don't know, it just does. Just does.
But I think,
Because everybody knows you're on the planning commission and
So?
they say, oh, he's on the planning commission, so this must be right.
Well, I've been outvoted 7-1. What are you talking about?
Well,
Wait, no, look, wait.
It's okay. but
Laura, everyone has a right to express opinion. My only request
They do,
would be,
they do,
in doing
absolutely.
that, you make it clear that a lot of study was done, a lot of outreach was done. You disagree on what was resulting?
I disagree on the study.
You didn't say you disagreed on the study at the time.
I was always against these changes since the beginning. I disagree with the study all along. And
When you say the study, you disagree that the study was accurate?
No, you
or you
disagreed with the
I see
study's
also flaws in
results.
the way it's presented. No, I disagree with some of the results, absolutely.
The results, yeah, no, I understand that, but
not
the
the
facts
study
are the facts.
itself.
Some of them are kind of misleading, I think. Like the
I don't think the fact that the
averages,
houses are much larger is, it's pretty easy
I
to see.
think it would be hard to find a person in the village who believes that the house is not much larger than they were.
The new houses are being built are larger, of course.
Right. That was the basic result of the study was houses are being built, but just by the numbers, just by the facts, are larger than have been built before.
Yeah, and the study also said that the houses being built today are not as larger than the houses that were built in the past that we think are very nice. And everybody forgets to say on average.
Right. No, I think very clearly said on average.
No, I keep on correcting that. Nobody, it's always presented that way. Nobody says.
I think if you look at the
nobody
tape of the
says-
trustees
nobody
meeting, I
says
said on average.
Nobody says
I
on
have heard Glynis say on average, I don't know how many
She
times.
doesn't say on average.
She says on average all the time. It's on her charts, on
Anyway, we
average.
agree to disagree. but,
Right.
And just present the
Right.
GFA.
Right. So I just don't want to, I will not do something to trustees without everyone on the commission knowing. So I wanted to be very clear to everybody that I thought all we would do is say, on the GFA, 2 points. Number one, the accessory buildings are actually not included in the bigger zones. And number two, we think the best analysis, given that's what the law that they're actually voting on, is the pure change in GFA.
Pure change in
Okay, I
GFA
agree with that.
On top of the GFA reduction that already exists.
No, we're not going to add that.
Well, it's there.
That's your view.
Well, no, that's our,
You have a right to.
I'll add it. You don't
well,
have to add it.
that's a done
You don't
done.
have to add it.
Well, that's a done done.
But that's not what they're voting
It's
on.
still a double dip,
Well, no, that's a done done.
which means maybe this reduction should be less drastic to take into
It's not
consideration.
2%. You find that drastic, do you?
15% I find drastic. Or
Okay.
10%.
All right.
Okay.
Well, so we're agreed that
Right,
we're going,
right.
okay.
Okay.
March 8th, yeah,
Yes, at
okay.
our next meeting at the beginning of April. Hopefully this will have, in the next phase, the
It
search
will
study.
be resolved
And
and stuff, yeah.
Ed Cargan will have a copy of the Dark Skies.
Okay, all right. So we discussed the truck, okay.
Yes?
This wasn't been recorded?
He left.
Oh, this should have been recorded.
Kidding.
No,
This should
I
have
think
been-
Of course it
tape is
should have
on.
been recorded. This is
She has
amazing.
notes.
No,
The tape is on.
I think it's still on.
Well, Zach, you're
Definitely
here
should be
for something.
recorded.
What are you here for?
I'm here to observe this in action. Now I know why you're
democracy
here and not
in
watch it on YouTube. You don't get the full effect.
Okay, Jay, did you have something to say? Did you want to say something?
The only thing I wanted to mention is, I don't know if you're aware, but I guess the school is going to be purchasing a residential lot
Yes.
over on
They are on Narrow Lane.
And I don't know whether that's something, because obviously that lot is not going to have to adhere to any zoning.
Right. It's probably something we should talk about at the next meeting.
Yeah.
we saw
So
that.
might be something to just get in front of that, because
Right.
I think as a village, we
Right.
have very little input as to what they put on that if we allow them to purchase it.
Right.
And all of a sudden, what had been the site of a, I don't know, I think it's a 3,500 square foot home is now going to be the site of an 8,000 square foot
Right.
building
Yeah.
plus parking for 25 cars.
Yeah.
Right, and it's
Yeah.
also, I think we've generally tried to
an
discourage that in the
armory.
historic district. If they want space, they should go to the business district, right?
Yeah. Might
So,
have an
yeah,
armory
yeah.
on it, too.
Yeah,
Better planning.
right.
Oh, geez. Don't even go there, right?
Right.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's good. We need to look at that.
The March meeting, I'm sorry, yes.
The only thing I would like to add
Yeah.
is Ed does have a point as far as getting the word out, so it
Right.
could be nice to see the new update on the website.
Yep.
I know the review of built conditions and regulations, the presentation at the prior board
Right.
meeting was on the website, so it would be nice to see the new.
Yeah, these are all going to be put on the website.
And then the second thing I wanted to point
Right.
out also is that when you were looking at the trends of increased building and
Right.
increased GFA, the data was taken from the town hall.
Correct.
But it only went up to 2015.
Correct.
So you can only imagine
Right.
what 2016 and
Correct,
17 would be.
correct.
That's just another thing just to think about in the overall discussion.
Yeah.
What's going on the website?
All of this, there's a few other things they've received, it's all going to go on the website.
Okay.
So,
What, as,
just as material, so that people, because there's a public hearing next week, people see
okay,
everything
as
that's out
public
there.
comment is going on?
Right, correct.
Okay, not as,
Just as public comment. Right.
thank you.
Apparently, they got some letters that will also go. up.
I'm a can vote till the end of March anyway.
Right, they vote on March 20th, I think, so
Okay.
there's the extensive opportunity for public comment. And we encourage everyone to come to the March 8th public hearing and state their views. So
Well,
that's the end of the
I'm on the
March
planning
meeting.
commission.